Hi everybody. Thank you for being here, first of all. So as she said, I am a graphic designer and a lecturer in media from Lahore, Pakistan originally, but based in Amsterdam. And this is a bit of my first entry into combining my love for graphic design with media and cultural analysis theory. So the typography element is quite new to me because I've mostly worked with films or TV, literature, as well as more visual illustration. So I'm happy to share this very work in progress moment with you. What you see here right in front of you are print ads selling cosmetic products to women in Pakistan between the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And if you dig into the archives a bit more, you'll find many such examples printed in Urdu, illustrations, as well as photographs included in the ads. And the Urdu typography in these ads are usually in a very soft flowing script. And this for me always, of course, just felt familiar growing up in Lahore, and it was a very common part of my visual landscape that was around me. But when I began looking a bit more closely through my research, I realized how much was actually happening beneath the visual elements that we see. So the behind the script as well as next to the script with the surrounding visual elements. And especially in the early decades after Pakistan became independent in 1947, I could see how such prints were playing with ideas of modernity and identity. So focusing on these archival print ads of cosmetic products, my question really is, in Pakistan, how did Urdu typography in mid-20th century advertising construct a post-colonial feminine ideal, one that negotiated between tradition and modernity? Urdu is majorly written in the Nastaliq style. So that's what you see on, I get confused, so the left side. And this script emerged in ancient Persia as a fusion of two styles between Naqsh and Taliq, making it a Perso-Arabic script. And on the other side of the screen, you see, So you see is an example by the Iranian calligrapher Shahab Andarva, who's drawn random sentences in the Nastaliq style with no cohesive meaning, simply to show the aesthetic flow of the script and its Persian roots. So with its very diagonal rhythm and suspended flowing lines, Nastaliq was often called the bride of calligraphy, and through the Mughal period, it traveled into South Asia, became Urdu's defining script, associated with things like poetry, grace, cultural refinement. And coming from a very media theoretical background myself, I approach typography through a very cultural lens, asking that when we see a word written in a certain style, what deeper meanings does that style carry? What social or historical values are embedded within this visual form of language itself? What does all of that have to do with identity, be it national identity, cultural, or gender? So while I'm still very new at learning the technicalities of script and typography, my focus for now is on how Urdu script operates within systems of ideology in a very particular historical moment. So my argument is that Urdu script wasn't merely decorative at the time, but functioned as a political aesthetic, a visual language that encoded notions of identity, femininity, and cultural belonging. So here we really move from Urdu as a textual script to Urdu as a visual one. And as Johanna Drucker writes in The Visible Word, typography and written language evidence clear physical attributes whose specificity can only be understood in relation to the historical conditions of its production. So the visual appearance of language always embodies the culture, ideology, and the historical moment that produce it. And typography in this way is never neutral. It carries the values of its time and how it looks. So while Nastaliq itself comes from a long cross-cultural process of development, what really interests me is its reappropriation or even reinvention around and after the 1947 Indian partition, when Pakistan was just coming into being. So So in this period, Urdu typography became a product of that very Indian partition, so that historical condition, a moment when a young nation was crafting its identity, not just through language, but also through design, something that often goes unnoticed in discussions of national culture from the region. So if we move a step ahead, at the top you see an Urdu phrase that reads, Pakistan hamara watan hai, meaning Pakistan is our nation. So it's a slogan that was heard everywhere during the partition of 47 and afterwards repeated with zeal in speeches, pamphlets, newspapers. But here, of course, I won't go into the full political history of how India and Pakistan were divided, but it's important to just pause on the role that language played in that moment, both textually as well as visually. So here, Urdu wasn't just a language, but it became a symbol of unity and Muslim identity. And the Urdu script was central to that process. It gave the new nation a visual identity that felt quite distinct from India and India's Devanagari Hindi script. And there's a lot more politics at play at the time than we see visually just in front of us now. So what's interesting is that within this script, we also find variations, so different typographic styles and lettering choices from classic, traditional calligraphic to lithographic nastaliq and more commercial display nastaliq as well. And we see variations of these in the ads later on too. So here, already leading up to the partition, it was used to mobilize Muslim populations of India towards a separatist cause. And as Tariq Rahman says in his book, Language and Politics in Pakistan, the choice was very, very symbolic. So Urdu carried the prestige of Mughal high culture with its Persian literary tradition, and it was seen as a unifying marker of Muslimness, so whatever that meant at the time. So this connotation of Urdu with tradition bleeded into the post-partition emergence of Pakistan with ongoing tensions with what modernity looks like within this new state. So Mufti in his book, Forget English, reminds us that this effort to normalize Urdu at the time as the national language always struggled against one inherent contradiction. Urdu was used to imagine an indigenous national identity, but it wasn't truly indigenous to Pakistan, as we see. It was only the mother tongue of a small population or a small percentage of the population and didn't reflect Pakistan's very diverse ethnic linguistic landscape. Yet it became a way of imagining the nation both textually and visually. So while it was a unifying symbol, it was also an enforced one, promoted through education, state documents, official media, and its authority was inherently post-colonial. This process entailed transforming Urdu into a post-colonial hegemonic cultural authority, which we can call it, meaning that a language that wasn't born of the land, but became dominant through the power of its institutions and aesthetics. So this is where Urdu script played a crucial role. On the surface, it appeared very soft, graceful, and familiar, but once again, beneath it, it carried the authority of the state at the time. So it made the nation's voice look culturally authentic, even when that authenticity was actually being very carefully constructed. We see, when we start seeing Urdu in ishtihars, meaning advertisements during the 50s, 60s, and 70s Pakistan, the same hegemonic authority that we just talked about moves into consumer culture now. So the national language becomes a voice of what Muslim identity looks like after independence, but also not just for the Pakistani citizens, but for the Pakistani consumers. And just as importantly, what it looks like. So in this time of history, Pakistan was really entering its era of growing international trade. So a lot of brands being advertised like Lux, Pond's, Tibet Snow, Colgate were either from different parts of the South Asian region or completely foreign. So how they became localized through Urdu script is quite fascinating. These commercials appeared in daily newspapers like Jang, Nawai Waqt, and Dawn, which you see on this side. And on the right side, they also appeared in magazines such as Alamgir, Nigar, and Zebul Nisa. And tracking down these materials actually is far from straightforward. So the archives are extremely scattered. Some are online at places like the British Library, rekhta.org, khajistan.com, but I found many through personal collections on Facebook, Reddit, Instagram accounts. So the publication details are often missing. So I've taken quite a messy method along the way, which I also find joy within. And these ads were mostly for things like soaps, biscuits, tonics, medicine, household goods. And here something new really began to emerge. So many ads now were specifically addressing women, so the Pakistani female Urdu readership of the time, and the boundaries between womanhood, post-coloniality, and consumerism began to blur at this point. So if we zoom into Urdu print magazines for a minute, like I said, women formed a large part of that readership. So some magazines covered fiction, such as short stories, poems, and others were film magazines, or they discussed social issues and, topics about daily life. And as Taj notes here, most of these ads are illustrated with line drawing images of modern women dressed according to the intimate settings. So these Urdu ads promoted a new kind of consumer modernity, which we can call, one that promised women self-care and empowerment while reinforcing their domestic role. And the Urdu script grounds them culturally in the face of these products coming in from different parts of South Asia itself or even outside the region. So in these ads, I really look at how image and text collectively, so the illustration or the photograph of the woman and the font itself, work together to negotiate that post-colonial tension that Pakistan found itself within between tradition and modernity. So the focus is on the material appearance of the language through script and the construction of identity through that. And here what I call notions of modesty clashing with modernity come into play, and that's slowly building the post-colonial woman of the time through these advertisements. So the first print ad I was looking at is selling the soap Lux, which is an international brand produced by the company Unilever, which is from the UK, whose products are indeed still very famous in South Asia. So this was printed between the 60s and 70s, but I wasn't able to find its exact publication source and date. Here we see a woman gazing softly at a bar of white-colored soap, touching her pearl necklace, next to a large Urdu headline below saying Lux. So if we zoom into, the Lux logo mark almost here in Urdu, it uses a bold Urdu translation of the foreign product name Lux, which helps visually soften the brand's foreignness, making it a bit culturally accessible to the female readers and viewers, and especially next to the soap image above that you see, where English type appears and the product in its original form sort of appears. So despite that being placed on top of the Lux title, the word itself in Urdu then looks and feels local and familiar. And if we go below that, the line there says in Urdu, ab aur bhi zyada khushbudar, which means now even more fragrant. It's written with the natural diagonal ligatures that make it look bold, yet a bit more conversational than the bigger Lux logo. And if we look closely at the Urdu word khushbudar, so fragrant, where the arrow goes, the small vowel markers, or what we call harkat, above the letters, which usually just indicate vowels and pronunciation, have been turned into tiny floral shapes. So this transforms the word into an image where the type is decorated and you can almost see the scent that it's describing. So typographically, this is quite powerful, that in a way it feminizes the language without showing overt sensuality. And like I said, I love kind of focusing on the typography as well as the visual elements around it. So when we focus on the rose and pearls in the image, the rose, which also looks white, similar to the soap that is white, in her hair, and the pearls around her neck and hand symbolize notions of virtue, elegance, luxury, and the flower naturalizes the soap, saying that this beauty is innate, organic, and part of her nature. In fact, the rose repeats what we see in the ornamented khushbudar word below, with those small floral vowel markers that we just talked about. And this repetition connects the woman's body with the written script through ornamenting, almost mirroring each other. And what I also find really interesting is how there's what we can call a Nietzsche nazar of the female character in there, meaning her gaze is Nietzsche, meaning lowered and a downward glance, which is both sensual yet restrained. And if we notice, she isn't looking directly at the viewer, yet she's aware of being seen. It's a sense of controlled sensuality, a perfect example of how femininity is balanced between modern intimacy and moral restraint. So all these characters or all these elements together in the ad capture what I've called the modest modern Pakistani woman, who is both sensual but self-contained. And the way the Urdu typography works here is quite central in what the images then reflect back. And then I looked into another ad, which I found quite fascinating. This was printed sometime in the 1960s in Nagar magazine in Karachi, which I found through the Citizens Pakistan archive online. And it's selling a very famous product. Hello? Yes. So yeah, this other ad is selling a very famous product of Tibet Snow skin whitening cream. So while the product itself is problematic, catering to these Eurocentric ideals of a fair-skinned woman, the ad's design itself is very telling. So the product was manufactured in what was East Pakistan at the time and now Bangladesh, yet the ad is entirely in Urdu and not Bengali, targeting Urdu female leadership across West Pakistan. This is also telling of how Urdu was being used as a homogenizing tool visually between East and West Pakistan at the time. So we see how typography also localizes regional brands which might feel foreign at the time. Here we see how the product name Tibet, again, is written in a very bold, heavy stroke, very solid, almost like a logo once again. And that thickness gives the brand a sense of confidence. But because it's written in Urdu, it also makes an outside product once again feel very familiar. And just below it, the words snow and cold cream are written in softer, more flowing style. The strokes are lighter, more delicate, what we might call a feminine rhythm next to the boldness of the brand mark. And the contrast between the two visually performs the tension between softness, modernity, and modesty. If you look right above it, the line here, the first line here says, "Happy women always wear Tibet." And the paragraph that you see talks about how a fresh and youthful face is maintained only by using this cream, and there's nothing better than this cream. It's written in a more flowing Nastaliq handwriting, possibly handwritten and then copied, a bit more diagonal and tightly spaced, giving it a more conversational feel. And it feels as if the text is directly speaking to the reader, woman to woman. And what's interesting is how this voice appears inside a leaf-shaped speech bubble, at least that's how I saw it. And that shape immediately connects the ad's message to ideas of nature and purity once again, softening her act of speech. So even as the woman is given a voice through this petal-shaped speech bubble, it's framed within something organic and delicate, keeping her modern expression culturally modest. And if we zoom out slightly, around her head, we see a circular flower frame, almost like a halo, and it works as a decorative frame, but also symbolically sanctifying her in a way. And here we see how these floral curves visually echo the rhythm of the script below, the same flowing diagonals and soft loops. And there's kind of a harmony between image and text here. So the Urdu lettering, her face, the floral ornament, all share the same visual language of grace. And finally, as you could tell in my previous ad, that I really like how, I'm very interested in how the glance works here. So here there's a direct nazar, meaning a direct gaze or glance, which is quite unusual for the time, as mostly women were shown looking downwards or looking away. And here, instead here, it's very steady and almost confrontational. There's no shyness or downward glance here, but instead she meets the viewer's eye directly. which gives the image a kind of an emotional stillness. At the same time, it isn't a distant pose. It evokes an interactive mode in the viewer. She's aware of being looked at and, in a sense, invites it from the viewer. So invites and expects the woman, reader, or viewer to form a relationship with her, one modern woman inviting another. So the entire image here is quite interesting, as it itself is a flower with a stem and a leaf, and thus the whole image composes a nature motif within which the face and text together on the one hand and the product on the other set up a sense of an exchange relation between traditional femininity and contemporary consumerism through the language of gender. And yeah, I could go on and analyze each and every corner of the ad, but what I also found interesting was the text right below her face, which says Gul Andam and then Shamim Ara. So Shamim Ara is actually the actress that you see in the image, a very famous Pakistani actress at the time. And Gul Andam, going back to Persian, would mean flower body or something similar to that. So they're already, attaching an adjective of a flower body to this actress's face. So here, looking at these two ads together, we can see how Urdu typography, in relation to its other visual markers in the layout, isn't just mediating culture, but regulating it in a way. So it's presenting a visual language for a new nation where femininity is modernized, but only within acceptable cultural boundaries. So in both examples, the Urdu visual script operates as a cultural mediator, so translating foreignness into something that feels familiar, emotionally legible. And the script itself becomes gendered. Its softness, curves, ornamentation mirror the ideals of this new post-colonial woman in a newly formed Pakistan, who's graceful, modest, modern, yet contained. And this is where we really see Urdu's role as a post-colonial aesthetic form, where its visual status as the bride of calligraphy masks its ideological power. So as Taj writes once again, that these ads cultivate a modern consumerism that promised women a degree of empowerment and liberation, even while reinforcing their domesticity. So the tension is exactly what Urdu typography performs here. Its elegance or softness make modern beauty feel safe, but also that safety is within a very strict cultural boundary. So the same nastali curves that give it intimacy and belonging also shape the limits of how modern women can appear. So while these ads seem to offer the post-colonial woman a voice, that she speaks and she looks back, her modernity remains framed within Urdu's graceful containment. In this sense, Urdu typography doesn't just visualize identity, but it helps regulate it, producing what I call the modest modern Pakistani woman, a figure both liberated and disciplined through visual design. Yes, so that's it. Thank you so much for listening.